Welcome to Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana basketball news and discussion, brought to you by the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Join me live at assemblycall.com every Thursday night and immediately following every IU game for our live IU postgame show. And visit InsideTheHall.com for complete coverage of IU basketball and to join the discussion in the Inside the Hall Premium Forum.
Hoosiers are threatening at the 3-yard line.
Nothing beats game day in Bloomington. So get your Indiana football tickets now and be at family-friendly Memorial Stadium as the Hoosiers take on Northwestern University on November 2nd. Adult tickets are as low as $30, and as always, youth tickets are just $10. Visit IUHoosiers.com for more information.
50 to 10 to 5, touchdown! How about that?
All right, Alex. We have set aside some time this week to answer questions. You put out a call in the Inside the Hall Premium Forum to get some questions. We got a bunch of good ones, several submitted by voicemail that we're going to go to. Before we get to the questions, though, I want to point out a couple of comments that were made in the Q&A thread because they're just, really the perfect preamble to a Q&A podcast, and I think they sum up how a lot of people are feeling. Our buddy Madro said, "It's been a long off season. I'm all questioned out at this point, waiting for the season to begin so we can start getting some answers, and then we'll have some new and different questions to ask." Mark followed up by saying, "I was thinking exactly the same thing. I'm exhausted with all the questions and answers and opinions and speculation. At this point, I'm just ready for the season to start and go from there." Maybe an ironic preamble to a Q&A episode, but I do think a lot of people feel that way. Even the people who probably listened through this entire episode, even you and I, who are going to be here to answer these, whenever you get to this point in the offseason, it's like, man, let's just get some games because you want to actually start seeing some real answers. And especially after Hoosier Hysteria, where you get like this little taste of actually seeing the guys play, you just want to see more to see how it's all going to shake out. So, those guys usually submit questions. I thought it was worth respecting their feelings on it this time because I think it sums up how a lot of people are feeling right now.
Yeah, and it doesn't help that Hoosier Hysteria was so early this year because, we have it was October 5th, and now there's a whole month before they actually play the regular season game. And really with how light the November schedule is, I feel like Indiana may cruise through the whole month of November, and we may start twiddling our thumbs at some point that month and wondering when the games are going to get a little bit more competitive. So, I agree with, the questions are definitely a lot of fun to answer and discuss, but ultimately, a month from now, when the games actually are being played, all of this stuff will be forgotten, thankfully.
So with that said, please spend the next 35, 40 minutes with us on more questions and answers and opinions and speculation, because that's what we're here for. Okay, so speaking of the schedule, let's start with that question first. And here, I'll play it for you.
Good morning, gentlemen. This is IU grad Mark from California. My question is about Indiana's December schedule this year. Specifically, which games are the most important to win in order to help our overall resume? Basically, my question is it more important to win home games? Is it more important to win the conference games? Is it more important to win against the highest ranked teams, say like a Notre Dame, or what? I'd love to hear your answer, and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Alex, what do you think about that? You mentioned the November schedule is pretty light, but things toughen up, pretty quickly in December. Not necessarily a top 5, top 10 marquee matchup on there, but just a string of really, really competitive games, all of which are going to have meaning for Indiana's NCAA tournament resume. But what's kind of the hierarchy when you look at those in terms of importance? Well,
I would say Wisconsin would have to be near the top of the list for a couple reasons. One, it's a Big Ten game. Two, Indiana I wouldn't say never. They haven't won there in a long time. And
there's some people alive who it feels like never for winning at Wisconsin.
That's true. Wisconsin, to me, is going to be a solid team, and there's no way that game won't be a quad. I'm confused with all this quad stuff now still, but
that'll for sure be a quad one game.
Quad one, yeah, for sure. Given that it's on the road, and I think Wisconsin will be a pretty solid team, so that's got to be near the top of the list. The other ones, I would say, out of Florida State, UConn, Notre Dame, and Arkansas. If Indiana could win 3 or 4 of those games, they would be in pretty good shape, I feel like, overall with the resume. There isn't a whole lot of opportunities, as we mentioned, in November to build a resume other than just getting wins. I mean, there may not be a game in that whole month that really going to resonate much in terms of building a resume that means something for the tournament committee. But, between Florida State, they should be, I would think, top 40, top 50-ish team at minimum. UConn is, they're in the midst of a rebuilding project. They struggled last year, but that's a neutral court game in New York. I think UConn will be better than they were last year, so that could potentially be a top 50 type team. Notre Dame, of all the teams they're playing that month, they may be the best in terms of just how their season ends up. They've got some really good players coming back, and Mooney and Pfluger and Gibbs and Mike Bray's always done a pretty good job there. So I would say that one being on a neutral court would be an opportunity for a really good win. And then Arkansas obviously is a Power 5 school, but we don't know much about their team this year, given the coaching change and what their personnel is going to look like. So, and that one being at home, that one in Nebraska kind of feel like the lower run games of the month. But I would say if I was making a list of priority, I would put Wisconsin at the top, then probably Notre Dame second, Florida State third, UConn fourth, Arkansas fifth, Nebraska sixth would be kind of my hierarchy in terms of the importance of the games. Jerod, what do you think?
Well, I agree with you wholeheartedly on Wisconsin being number one. I mean, just goodness gracious, to get that monkey off our back, and because it's a true road game. And, we talked about this on a recent episode of the Assembly Call, and Andy and Coach obviously, very deep into the bracketology stuff. And, what they really said when you look at this is, the committee really wants to see that you can win away from home. And so the Wisconsin game for sure, falls right in there. If you look at the non-conference games, then to me, I would put UConn and Notre Dame as second and third there, simply because they're away from Assembly Hall. And I think, with so few opportunities to get wins away from home, there are none in November. I think Indiana's got to win at least one of those games. If you win both of them, they're not true road games, but at least they're neutral court wins that show, hey, we can win away from home. So that's the only quibble I would have, is I would put those two above Florida State and Arkansas. But of course, it can depend a little bit, on the relative strengths of those teams and what their, ultimate, Ken Pom profile and, kind of rankings end up looking like. But I just think when you look in the non-conference, always kind of look at, okay, where are opportunities to prove that we can win away from home? Those are really important. And I think Indiana doesn't have a lot of them, so they're really going to have to take advantage of the ones they do have. All right, next question. Here we go.
Hey, Jared and Alex, this is CJ21 from the Premium Forum. I got a question, or got a statement I guess I want your response to. By January 1, I think the lineup we see is one of the bigs, Brunk or Davis, with Trace at the 4, with Hunter at the 3, Green and Rob. Your response to that, is that real? Is that imagined? I think that's our best lineup. I think that's the best way. I think that's our best chance to really have a great season once we get everybody up to speed. Just want your thoughts on that and how far out of line you think that is. Thanks, and again, thanks for doing this. Look forward to hearing it. Bye-bye.
Alex, your thoughts on that lineup? It certainly seems less imagined now that we've seen Jerome Hunter, out there playing. It feels a little bit more reasonable to start projecting him forward into lineups. What do you think of that for Brunk or Davis, along with Trace, Jerome Hunter, Devante Green, and Rob Finney?
I mean, I like it as long as there's two major caveats to this. One, Jerome Hunter, assuming he's healthy and can play the amount of minutes that would be required of a starter or somebody who's heavily into the rotation, it would be great, I think, for Indiana's upside, their potential this season to have him be that player. But until we see it, we can't necessarily project it to happen. The second would be, can Trace Jackson Davis guard, adequately away from the basket that will be required of him if he's going to play the 4? I think the plan is for him to play the 4 this year, because otherwise you have a serious logjam at the 5 with Davis, Brunk, and Jackson Davis. I mean, I don't know how the minutes would even work there if those guys could only play the 5. So I think Trace is going to get every opportunity to play the 4. My question would be against a team like, say, Michigan. Isaiah Livers is a 4-man who can basically step out and go off the bounce a little bit and shoot threes. Is he going to be able to guard somebody like that? Can he guard other 4s from around the Big Ten? That's my big question there. But if he can, and I think the coaching staff thinks that that's possible. They've talked about it a lot in the preseason. I think he's a good enough athlete to get it done. But yeah, I mean, overall, I like that lineup. Al Durham not being a starter, that kind of makes me scratch my head a little bit. But that kind of gets you a little bit excited when you think about this. The fact that Indiana could have Justin Smith and Al Durham coming off the bench, guys who have started majority of their careers, and guys that have made improvements, especially Durham over the course of his career. He's a guy I think a lot of people are excited about entering the season, and Justin Smith has obviously gotten better with his defense. So I think if that were to be the case, I think it kind of just speaks to the overall strength and the depth of IU's roster.
Yeah, when you can start putting Jerome Hunter in lineups, it gives you a lot more flexibility. And obviously you mentioned kind of the logjam that Indiana can have at the center position. Let's knock on wood and hope that they have that all season long, which would mean that Joey Brunk, Deron Davis stay healthy. Because I think you could also see, because you're right, kind of when you look at this, not seeing Al Durham in there, it's like, okay, you kind of would want to fit him in somewhere, but where does he fit in? I mean, do you think if Trace comes along in his development, do you think that there are times based on certain matchups, especially with maybe smaller, quicker teams, that you see Trace at the 5, possibly even, Jerome sliding down to the 4, or Justin playing some more 4, and then you can get the 3 guards in there? Because I do think that there's going to be some opportunities, and I think I have a hard time. I really think that Indiana can play some good 3-guard lineups. I think Rob, Devante, and Al really complement each other well, and so that's kind of the hard thing for me, is trying to envision a best lineup that doesn't have those 3 guys on the court. Now, you might have to take one of the centers off, and so what do you do down low? But I do think that there are going to be some opportunities where those guys are going to get to play together too. And that's kind of the fun part. You're right. I mean, there's some flexibility, there's some options, there's some adaptability. We have a question about that coming up later. So that does, make it exciting as you start to project forward some.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing about Durham is I think he can play multiple positions. So you could see him at times playing the point guard. I think they've talked about that a lot in the preseason, but you can also see him playing the 3 and maybe guarding some bigger guys. The one concern I would have about kind of relying on the bigger lineup more consistently is you look around the Big Ten, there's a lot of schools that do play, 3-guard lineups. And so a team like an Illinois, they're going to play 3 guards. How do you match up against that speed and quickness if you're playing, Jerome Hunter at the 3 and Trace Jackson Davis at the 4? I don't know if it works in every situation. Now you want to have the strength of your team be making the opponent adjust to you, but you also have to be capable of defending. And I think with Indiana, the way they're going to build their team is defense first. So any lineup they put on the court is going to be with defense in mind first. And so, the one thing I'm interested to see kind of early in the season is how these different lineups mix and match, and are they able to, those guys specifically, Jerome Hunter, Justin Smith, Trace Jackson Davis, are they able to guard consistently on the perimeter? Because, right now we just don't know the answer to that question.
And some of this depends on what kind of development Justin Smith has made. Because if he's kind of growing and progressing as you would expect, he can be one of this team's 5 best players. He certainly has the ability to be its best defender and most versatile defender. So, that's the other thing that enters in here. But again, it's fun, sitting here in the offseason, kind of talking about having almost, too many good, solid players than not having, having these glaring holes or not having guys to fill these holes. I mean, it seems like this roster, has a good construction to it, and that Archie's going to have those options, and that's...
Yeah, we haven't even talked about Race Thompson in this conversation. Yeah. We haven't talked about Demezi. We don't know what he'll do. Armand Franklin we haven't discussed. I mean, there's potential to have, I think, 8 or 9 solid contributors, which... that's something that IU hasn't always had at times the last couple of seasons.
Yep. All right, next question.
Hi, Jerod and Alex. This is Calvert Henderson. And I'm just wondering, what you guys recommend as a place to get some IU apparel with the season coming up. I'd like to get some new T-shirts, maybe a sweatshirt or two, and would just love your guys' recommendation for the best site to go to pick these items up. All right. Thank you. I'll hang up and listen.
Alex, do you have any thoughts on a good site to pick up some IU apparel?
How about Home Field Apparel, Jerod? Do you want to tell us more about them?
That to the listener who sent that in, I mean, thank you for doing that and giving us an easy lead in to talk about our friends at Home Field Apparel. Yeah, I mean, look, Home Field, this is their third year sponsoring Podcast on the Brink. Third year, I think, sponsoring Podcast on the Brink. We certainly appreciate it. It's been incredible to see the growth that they've made just since we started, working with them. Started out, really just doing IU gear. They now have over 60 different schools that they're working with. I mean, they have really grown because their quality is so good. They've got this really smart strategy of, finding old vintage logos that aren't really in use anymore and bringing them back. But even with all these new schools that they have, their focus, still remains on Indiana University. That's what they have the most products for. You might have noticed that they've been doing a shirt of the week during football season, which has brought back a lot of really cool old logos. And of course, they've got, some of the classic basketball logos. They've got, the Bison logo that we talked about so much last year that they put on their incredibly comfortable sweatshirt. It's also on a t-shirt now. They've got the t-shirt that has the 5 championship seasons on it. Some really, really cool designs. If you haven't been there to check them out, go to homefieldapparel.com. You'll see a little button in the nav bar that says select your school, pick Indiana University, and just go browse through there. Find stuff for yourself, find stuff to pick up as gifts for the IU fan in your life. And when you do that, use the promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K. You'll get 15% off the entire order. And if you do, let us know. Send us a tweet. At Inside the Hall at Assembly Call. We'd love to see what gear you end up picking up. I have several items. They're pretty much my go-to items to wear during games. So homefieldapparel.com. Calvert Henderson, if you're looking for a place to find some gear, that's certainly the place that I would go. Homefieldapparel.com.
Thanks for the question, Calvert. We appreciate it. That was a late submission to this week's mailbag, but he got it in just in
it was
time.
like 3 minutes before we started recording.
I know that was
good
great
stuff.
Timing.
Thanks, Thanks, Calvert. Okay, next question.
Hey, Alex and Jerod, it's Swish from the Premium Forum. Appreciate the podcast. Always listen. Great stuff. As we enter the season, there seems to be 2 things that most of us Hoosier fans agree on. One, we're going to be good defensively, hopefully elite. Secondly, how are we going to score the basketball? Most of us, including myself, have looked towards Jerome Hunter as the golden child and maybe has all the answers, and then, of course, Devante Green. But beyond those 2 possibilities, where do you see us scoring the basketball? What is the solution to this? This will obviously dictate how good our season is or is not. So what do you see?
Alex, what do you think scoring-wise?
2 things. One, the first part of his question or his statement was he thinks Indiana's going to be good defensively, potential elite. I think they'll be good. I'm not sure if I'm ready to go to the elite level yet. I want to see how Joey Brunk and Deron Davis are defensively this year because I don't. I think in many ways Juwan Morgan was a little bit underrated as a defender, even though he was undersized. Losing him, I think, is a somewhat big deal. And also Romeo Langford, I don't think got enough credit at times for his defense on the perimeter. And I think Rob Finney is going to be good. Obviously, Al Durham and Devante Green, they can all defend. But I'd pump the brakes a little bit on the elite defense. Jerod, what do you think on that?
I think Indiana has some of the pieces that I could see them making a jump to elite, and we often talk about, pack line teams get a lot better in the third year. But I think they'll be good. I think it's much safer to say they'll be a good defensive team. I think they got a chance to be better than they were last year. But you're right. You look at Joey Brunk's defensive metrics from his time at Butler, they are not good. I think Deron Davis is actually a better defender than people give him credit for when he's actually defending down on the block. I think when he has to get out and move in space, he tends to struggle. And, Race Thompson has, shown himself to be a good defender in limited minutes, and we're not sure how Trace will be. But I think if you can get some kind of jump from Justin Smith, and if those guards are all ready to take the next step defensively, I think they could really spearhead a tough defensive attack that will certainly be good, has a chance to be great. Whether it's elite or not, I think a lot of things would have to fall into place there.
Yeah, and on the offense, he mentioned the two guys he mentioned were Jerome Hunter and Devante Green.
Yes, certainly Indiana's two most talented scorers.
Right. So Jerome Hunter right now, and I hate to keep going back to this, is we just don't know what Indiana's going to be able to get out of him. I think I agree with you that he's one of their most talented scorers, but we need to see it in over a long period of time before we can, I think, put him in the category of consistent or reliable or somebody you can say count on when you get into the Big Ten season. The rest of it's going to be interesting to me because I feel like there's 4 or 5 guys that can average between 8 and 12 points a game, but they're going to have to do that consistently and by committee. And there's going to have to be some guys that step up and make a better percentage of the threes. Now, I don't think Indiana is going to be a team that is reliant on the 3-pointer by any means, but I think that they're going to have to make some timely ones. I mean, the teams that are that win at a high level in college basketball, it's not necessarily dependent on making a ton of threes, but you have to be able to make at least 6, 7, 8 a game to keep teams honest. And that's that was
look at the two
year.
Michigan State games. Look at the 2 Michigan State wins from last year. What's the biggest difference in those 2 wins and most of Indiana's other games? The timely threes. I mean, that's
exactly. I mean, the game up in East Lansing, Romeo hit a couple timely ones, and then
Devante
the game
did.
In Assembly Hall. Yeah, the game in Assembly Hall, Justin Smith was making threes, and so that was like
much to Tom Izzo's chagrin.
Right. So, the guys I look at that I think can do it most consistently, I really like Al Durham in his 3rd year. I think the thing you have to like about Al Durham is he can get into the lane and draw fouls, right? So if the perimeter shot isn't falling, he's not a one-dimensional player offensively. He can get into the lane. He's not a great athlete, but he's shifty with the ball. He can get past people and he can draw fouls and get to the line. That's one way you manufacture points. Devante Green, I think he's got a really good chance to be this team's leading scorer, but he can't be just relying on the perimeter shot. He too has to kind of diversify his offensive game. Last year I haven't shared this graphic publicly, but Dylan Burkhart and I were looking at some shot charts from last year, and Devante's shot chart from the perimeter just doesn't look great in terms of percentages. And so he's got to be able to do the perimeter shooting more consistently, but also figure out other ways to score, whether that's get to the line or just be a facilitator at times. Jerron Davis and Joey Brunk, I think those guys could be 6, 7, 8 points a game guys, and then Trace probably in the same category.
I would think so.
Yeah. So, I mean, the exciting thing is that you have a lot of different guys that I think that are capable of doing it, but you also have a lot of guys who are maybe stepping into roles that they've never played before and haven't had that responsibility before. So we don't know how they're actually going to do until we see some games. And we may not learn until IU plays a really good team in December if they're going to have guys that can step up, because, scoring, like 20 points against Western Illinois is definitely not the same as scoring 20 points against Notre Dame or Florida State.
I think it's going to be really interesting for Indiana's guards to set the pace in terms of consistent scoring production, because there are so many question marks after those guys. What are we ready to expect from Justin Smith on a game-in, game-out basis? Is Trace Jackson Davis ready to be a guy who, even if he's not getting points in the flow of the offense, can get out in transition and get offensive rebounds enough to get 8 to 10 points a game? How many minutes will Jerome Hunter play? There's question after question once you get past those top 3 guys. And those top 3 guys have some questions too, but I think Rob Finney probably is going to play the most minutes on this team. He's a guy who shot well last year before he got hurt. He needs to be able to step up and make those timely threes like he talked about and be more efficient when he drives. I mean, his 2-point field goal percentage last year was like 37%. He's got to get better at that. But, I think his mindset, I'm sure, is going to be to set guys up, but he's going to have to pick his spots to score. And then I think Al Durham is a really important one. And I think it's fair to project, forward for him now as a junior to be maybe an 11, 12, 13-point scorer. I think you're right. He can get to the free throw line, although his free throw numbers all went down as a sophomore from when he was a freshman. But I think maybe playing without Romeo, he now becomes Indiana's best guy at getting to the basket. And I felt at times last year when he was on the court without Romeo that he felt more comfortable attacking the basket. And so I hope we see more of that from him because he can be a really versatile player. But if you look at, basically take all the Big Ten games, add in the Butler and the Louisville game, out of those 22 games, there were 7 games last year where Al had 3 points or fewer, and several where he had none. And so I think one challenge for Al that he has got to step up and take now that he's a captain, now that he's an upperclassman, is he can't have those games anymore where he just gets taken out of it and kind of struggles to find his way and struggles to be assertive. Now, I know, part of that, he was dealing with a hand injury after the Michigan State game, and that does contribute to some of it, but it's just kind of been a thing we've seen from him that it feels like some games he just struggles to assert himself. That can't happen anymore. He also, is going to be a guy that probably plays 30 minutes a game somehow, some way, and he's going to have to get in there and score. And so I think, scoring-wise, I think those 3 guys have to set the pace because they're going to have the ball in their hands. They're going to play the most minutes. And then you kind of get what you get from some of the other guys. And if a guy steps up as maybe a consistent 4th or 5th scorer, maybe Jerome, maybe Justin, maybe Trace, hopefully, the big guys do their thing down there. Now I think you can be a consistent offensive team. But I think it's all got to start with the guards.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there.
Okay, next question.
Hi, Jerod. Hi, Alex. This is Tom Jameson from the Premium Forum. My question has to do with Jerome Hunter. You probably get this question quite a bit, but assuming that he is healthy and plays about 20, 25 minutes a game, or whatever your estimate is, put that in there, does that drastically change your estimate on whether or not the IU gets to the dance or not? If it does change your perception, your preview of it, then does it do it drastically? And in there, could you possibly give how many games you think they'll win? Again, with a healthy Jerome Hunter. How many games preseason? How many games Big Ten season, and even Big Ten tourney altogether? Thanks, guys. Bye.
I mean, I think Jerome Hunter's availability is one of the biggest swing factors in the Big Ten this year. So I'll just...
Yeah, I do too. I mean, a lot of people, and I think we'll get to this in the next question, asked me about where I picked Indiana, and I picked them 9th in the Big Ten. But if you told me in the preseason that Jerome Hunter was going to play 25 minutes a game and be healthy the whole season, my pick would be a lot different. I don't know exactly where I would have them, probably 6th or 7th in a fringe tournament team. So to kind of answer your question, Tom, I mean, in terms of ceiling, I mean, there's not another guy on the roster who changes the ceiling of this team more than Jerome Hunter. If he can play, he's, a potentially dynamic scorer that can score not from the perimeter, but also in the mid-range and at the rim around the paint. I mean, we kind of saw a couple of glimpses of what he can do in the Hoosier Hysteria scrimmage when he had that nice little kind of back down fadeaway jump shot. I mean, there's not many guys on this roster that are capable of doing something like that, and he's one of them. So, under your scenario where he plays 20 or 25 minutes a game and he's healthy, I think there's a realistic chance for Indiana to make the tournament, win something like 21, 22 games, top half of the Big Ten finish, because, there's a big opportunity for Indiana to grab a lot of wins in the non-conference this year, just based on the schedule. I mean, if they can win 11 non-conference games, which I don't think is completely out of the question by any means, they play 13. And if they were to win just 11 of those, and then go, 500 in the Big Ten, that's 21 wins right there. And I don't think that's too unrealistic for this team.
What do you think are the most irreplaceable skill sets on this roster? Because I would submit that the 2 most irreplaceable skill sets are Rob Finney's skill set as a point guard. I mean, if you take him off, you just don't have anybody that can do some of the things that he can do. And I think Jerome Hunter's ability on the wing. I think those are the 2, because you just don't have anybody else that can do what he can do or what he projects to be able to do. And so to me, look, I think that doesn't mean that there aren't other players that are important. But, let's say that, you lose Devante Green for 5 games. Well, you can slide Al Durham in there. It's not going to be good. You're going to lose some depth at guard. But Finney and Hunter, you take those guys out, you have to change what you do because you just don't have people who can do those things. And so that's why I think Hunter is so important to lift this team's ceiling. I think it's absolutely huge, and you don't want to put too much pressure on a guy that hasn't played a game yet. But, I mean, he fits so perfectly in all these different rosters that you try to piece together. Because when you take him out of it and you start putting rosters together, it's like, well, it'd be nice to have a guy that can score on the wing, that's tall, that can make threes, that can maybe be a versatile defender. And it's like, oh yeah, you've got all that in the one guy. So I think it's reasonable for Indiana fans to kind of feel that way, and I do think it drastically changes what this team can be capable of.
Yeah, I would probably throw Devante Green in that category of the top. I don't know that I put him top 2. I put him 3.
I'd probably put him third.
I would say his shot creating ability, right? Because
yes.
Look at last year in the Big Ten tournament game against Ohio State. Nobody else was really doing anything, and the only reason Indiana was remotely close to winning that game was Devante Green just started bombing in threes from all over the court. I mean, there's something to be said for a guy who, when he's hot and going right, can take over a game offensively. And not that he's ever done it with consistency, but he has at times shown himself capable of just kind of going on a rampage and, single-handedly, kind of keeping Indiana in a game. Now, that was Ohio State game. They didn't win, but I think he scored something like 26 points. And it was ridiculous. I was courtside for that one, and I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. It was just a remarkable performance, and he even
I agree with you. I would put
in
that
the NIT
third.
that where he was just off the charts in terms of making shots. So I think I agree with you. Those two and Devante Green, I think, would be the 3 most irreplaceable things on this roster.
Yep. Okay, we got one more voicemail question. Here we go.
Hi, Quang from the Premium Forum. Alex, you were higher than most media picking IU 8th in the Big. I feel they would be much better. Were you hedging, and do you secretly feel they would do much better?
So you actually picked Indiana 9th, correct? Not 8th?
I did pick Indiana 9th.
Okay.
Which I pointed out to Quang in the forum, and he said he wasn't going to edit his voicemail, so he's rolling with 8th. So he wants to know. Sorry, I missed the end of his question.
Were you hedging? Do you think Indiana will do better than that? Like, maybe was that like your public pick, but do you secretly, harbor more optimistic expectations for Indiana?
I mean, I kind of answered this in the last question. If Hunter's healthy, then I think they're going to do better than that. Now, if he's kind of just a, 8th man or 9th man and just kind of makes a minimal impact, I would pick Indiana right around the same spot. I mean, the thing with me with projecting the Big Ten this year, after the first 3 teams, it's completely wide open in many ways. There's so many teams with so many question marks. A lot of things are going to have to go right for a team like Penn State to make the tournament, which they've never done under Pat Chambers. A team like Iowa with Jordan Bohannon, we don't know if he's going to play. Michigan, we don't know how they're going to play at all because they have a brand new coach who's never coached college basketball. Indiana, I think there is some recency bias that people are picking them lower because they saw how much of a disaster last season was, and maybe a little bit of that crept in for me as well. I mean, we all have our own biases kind of based on what we've observed and what we've seen. But, I think 9th is fair in the preseason. Do I think that they could finish much higher? Yeah, I think 6th or 7th is perfectly reasonable if Jerome Hunter plays, but I just kind of went with my gut on that. It wasn't like I studied it for weeks or anything. It was kind of one of those things where, I had to put together the media poll. I had a couple weeks to do it, thought about it a little bit, but I didn't overanalyze it because, like I said, I feel like after those first 3 teams, you can go in a variety of ways in the preseason. And ultimately, we're all going to have some major misses. I mean, last year, I think Indiana and Nebraska were both picked to finish top 4, and we saw how that turned out.
Ask Dylan about his preseason projection of Indiana.
Yeah.
It happens, man. It happens. Okay, we've got a few other questions that were submitted, so let's roll through these real quick. We don't have voicemails for them, but I'll just read them. From Robot. As the season looms, what are your best tips for creating low-stress game days? Things to eat or avoid eating, ways to reduce anxiety when the game doesn't go well, other suggestions. Got a lot of practice with this last year.
Jerod, you can answer this one. You take this one.
The things that you or I do during games may be a little bit different than what others should do just because we have kind of unique ways that we watch them. I mean, you're, on press row, watching it there, kind of working. it's kind of become that for me too, prepping for the post-game show, because I'm, taking notes and getting ready for the halftime report and doing all of that stuff. So I don't really think about creating low-stress game days because, once the game hits, it's just like kind of total focus. So, I would say, things to eat or avoid eating. You probably don't want to eat a whole lot of spicy stuff, or maybe try a new ethnic food that you haven't had before, because that could lead you to have to leave watching the game. So probably just go with foods that how your body handles them, because, if it's the second half and Indiana's down and they're making a big comeback, you don't want to have to, be running back to the bathroom and, doing that kind of stuff. So I would say, that would be my suggestion for eating. And ways to reduce anxiety when the game doesn't go well. Sit back and close your eyes and reminisce about better times. You're an Indiana fan. You've got some good times to think about. So, during some of those times, think about the good days, and then, think about Trey Galloway and Anthony Leal and Jordan Geronimo coming in next year, and think about the future. Just try to take yourself out of the present moment if things aren't going well. That's what
don't go on the forum. My number one tip would be don't go on the forum or Twitter or Facebook or any other place where people are going to constantly complain, because that's only going to make your blood pressure rise even higher. So just put on some nice, relaxing music. Take a nice, depending on where you are, take a nice brisk walk. Maybe go outside, get some fresh air.
Put the watch shot on loop on YouTube.
Definitely don't search IUBB on Twitter. Just don't do that. Don't do that.
Do not do it. From CW76, between Franklin and Anderson, who will emerge first as to making a meaningful contribution? It's a really good question, because these are two guys that we didn't talk about before when it comes to lineups. Franklin, obviously a freshman, this will be his first go-around. Demezy, we saw some last year, wasn't really, he had the one really good game in the exhibition, but never really made a mark, kind of during the regular season. I would say Armand, mainly because there's just less depth at his position. I mean, we've talked about it. There's only 4 ball handlers on this roster. So you're one, Al Durham or Devante Green turned ankle away from Armand Franklin having to play 10, 15 minutes a game just out of sheer necessity. And that's not to say that he won't be ready for it, but I just think the roster makes it a little bit more likely for him to emerge as making a meaningful contribution. But if Demezy can come out and prove that he can hit 38 to 40% of his threes, they'll find a way to get him on the court 10 minutes a game, because Indiana's going to need the shooting. And some of that will also depend on Jerome, because if Jerome can go out there, if he's not able to play a lot of minutes, then again, you're going to need someone who can make some shots from the perimeter, and Demezy could be that guy. That's what he projected to be as a high school player. But I would say Franklin to answer this specific question.
Yeah, I agree with you on Franklin. And remember this, if Indiana does elect to go with a 3-guard lineup with Durham and Tennessee and Green, I mean, Armand Franklin's pretty much the first guard off the bench. I mean, I don't necessarily, I've never really considered Demezy Anderson or Jerome Hunter a guard. I mean, I guess Demezy Anderson, in terms of his height, he might have been listed as a guard in high school, but he's not a good enough ball handler to be considered a guard, and he's not someone that you put the ball in their hands and tell him to go create something. He's going to be more of a catch and shoot guy on the perimeter. So, yeah, I mean, it's got to be, for me at least, in the preseason right now, based on what we know, Armand Franklin.
From Sandrocks, Archie likes this team's adaptability. Assuming you agree, how will this make it more difficult for opposing teams? We touched on this some earlier, too.
Yeah, I mean, I think the potential benefit of that is last year IU was so predictable on offense. It was basically you had to stop Romeo and Juwan, and you stopped Indiana. And when teams figured that out, once they got into Big Ten season, and realized that you can back off certain guys and let them shoot from the perimeter, it's not necessarily going to be, it's going to be a lot easier to beat Indiana this year. I think having that adaptability in terms of hopefully having 3 guys who can score the ball perimeter reliably in the paint, and Joey Brunk and Deron Davis if he can stay healthy, and Trace Jackson Davis, and then also potentially having a guy like Jerome Hunter who could help space the floor, coupled with a healthy Rob Finney who was playing really well before his injury last year, and Al Durham and Devante Green who can at times reliably hit the 3-point shot. I think that gives Indiana just a lot a lot of different pieces potentially on offense that can kind of mix and match and give them some success. I think defensively is another kind of wrinkle that we weren't able to see last year. Having Trace Jackson Davis at the 4, I think gives Indiana just a different look in terms of what they'll have in the paint and being able to kind of guard teams with size. And then also having the ability to kind of maybe go smaller at times and put Justin Smith or Jerome Hunter at the 4 is going to allow them to match up against a team like I mentioned earlier, like an Illinois, who may have a smaller lineup, or even a Michigan State at times could have a smaller lineup this season. So, it's difficult because they lost their 2 most talented offensive players. But I think one thing that people may be overlooking entering this season is there could have been guys last year, and this is just me kind of spitballing here, but that weren't totally comfortable in their role offensively on a game-to-game basis. And this year, those roles could be a little bit more defined because it's not going to be every possession down, get the ball to Romeo or Juwan. It's going to be, you maybe hit Devante first, but after that, it could be 3 or 4 different guys who are looking to get the ball, whereas last year it was a whole lot more predictable. And I think the more guys who are kind of given the green light and given a little bit of freedom to kind of do their own thing at times, I think that's going to help their games blossom as the season goes along.
I agree. And look, again, coming back to the adaptability, Jerome Hunter's availability is going to play a huge role in just how adaptable Indiana is. The one thing, a lot of times when you talk about adaptability in basketball now, you think about it in terms of having big guys who can step out and shoot, because that gives you, a lot of different things that you can do. This team doesn't really have that. Duran, Joey Brunk, Trace Jackson Davis, Race Thompson, those guys none of them have really proven themselves as being able to step outside and shoot. Same thing with Justin Smith, really. And so almost any lineup construction you put together, you're probably going to have 2 non-shooters on the court. And I think that makes it really, really important that Rob, Devante, Al, certainly Jerome, if he's able to play, are able to be reliable 3-point shooters. And Armand too, because you're not going to get it from your big guys. So, you're always going to have those guys on the court, and they're going to need to make outside shots. And I think you are going to be able to adjust how you play. Maybe you play some inside when you've got Duran and Joey out there. Maybe you can adapt a bit and play a smaller lineup, but you're going to have to be able to step out and knock down shots. And we saw what happens to an offense when you can't do it. So that makes it really important. And I don't think that's going to adapt much game to game. And I think, again, that's why what the guards are able to do from a scoring perspective is going to be so, so important. Because if they're reliable scorers and reliable shooters, now you do have a lot of adaptability with who you put at the 4 and 5. And Archie can really, play matchups and, play different styles and even adjust in game. If your strategy was to pound it down low and that's not quite working, well, now we change it. Maybe we want to run more, so we don't play Duran as much this game, whatever. But it's all got to start with consistent production, consistent shooting from the backcourt guys, and hopefully the wing guys as well.
Absolutely.
And then from Roscoe D73, this season we may see a lot of Trace at the 4 with Davis or Brunk at the 5. If IU successfully recruits Dawson Garcia, I'd assume that we'd see a lot of Dawson Garcia at the 4 and Trace Jackson Davis at the 5, assuming he doesn't go pro after one season. How do you think playing a season at the 4 would help or hinder Trace changing roles to the 5 next season? What do you think? A lot of speculation in this one.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good problem to have, right? If they were able to get Dawson Garcia, I don't know that if him and Trace were playing together, there would be any defined role, because I think both guys are going to be able to, have the size to guard in the paint, but also have the versatility to step out and maybe hit the mid-range shot. I think Dawson Garcia's range could extend a little bit further, but he's also 6'11". So, how many 6'11" power forwards are there in college basketball? Not very many. So, I think sometimes we get too caught up in positions in basketball, especially offensively. I think it's kind of, you just come down and those 2 guys will probably start a possession on the block, and then, there'll be some movement and one guy maybe come to the high post or something like that. But defensively, I think both are going to be able to guard multiple positions, whether it be the 4 or the 5. And so, I think it would be a good problem for the coaching staff to have him figure out. I think that's a problem they want to see.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's definitely a problem that we would take. Keep Trace around for another year. Get Dawson Garcia. That's a pretty imposing front line right there. So
and don't forget, Joey Brunk's on the team next year too. So that's another thing to. I mean, Deron Davis is going to be gone, but having Joey Brunk on the roster next year too. I mean, if they were able to get Garcia, they're going to have a chance to kind of bring him along. A little, not completely, bring him off the bench or anything. I'm just saying, they're going to have some experienced guys back. They're going to kind of let him get his feet wet and get adapted to the game.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you, everybody who submitted questions. Alex, any final thoughts before we sign off and embark on another week of just wishing games were here already?
No, I mean, if anybody has any ideas here as we kind of wrap up the postseason here on Podcast on the Brink of episodes you'd like to see us do, or anybody you'd like to see us try to have on the show before the season starts, because I know once kind of the season starts, we have a lot of our regular guests on a week-to-week basis. We'll get into a lot of game discussions. So we have here about 3 or 4 more weeks before there's an actual game. If there's any,
do we need to do a Penn State preview? Should this be the first season that we preview Penn State now that they're getting NCAA tournament hype?
We do not. Who would we get? Crispin?
Oh yeah, we could get Crispin. We should have Crispin on just to do a little season preview. Yeah,
but I mean, as always, we're open to suggestions. Email us, tweet us, whatever. Send any negative comments to Jerod and not me. But it's going to be it'll be here before you know it. I know it seems like this off season. We say this every year, right? It just drags on longer and longer.
I feel like this off season
tournament.
Yes, and this off season really did, because there was no recruiting news there for a while until you got the Galloway Leal commitments. I mean, it really felt like it dragged. But yes, you're right. We need a longer actual season so that the off season is not quite as long.
They did go a little bit longer last year into deep March because of the NIT, but it still didn't feel like it was.
It just feels different.
Exactly.
We need an NCAA tournament. It's time this season.
Yep.
All right. Thank you for submitting your questions, folks. Remember to go to homefieldapparel.com. Use that promo code BRINK. You'll get 15% off. And we'll be back to talk with you again next week. See you, everybody. Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. Remember to join me and my co-hosts for more IU basketball talk at assemblycall.com, and visit Alex over at insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana basketball. If you want to support Podcast on the Brink, here is the single best way to do it. Tell anyone you know who loves IU hoops about us and suggest that they subscribe. Podcast on the Brink can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else podcasts are available. Tell your social media followers, email your friends, text your family members. For weekly discussion about IU basketball, they need to be subscribed to Podcast on the Brink. We'll talk to you next time. Go Hoosiers.